Welcome back, everyone. I'm Uriah Young, along with my co-host Maurice Huggins, with another episode from our 50, 40, 90 interview series. How you doing, Maurice?
I'm doing well, Uriah. How about you?
I'm doing great because our special guest with us today is Luke Epplin, the author of Moses and the Doctor, Two Men, One Championship, and the Birth of Modern Basketball. His writing has appeared online in The Atlantic, The New Yorker, GQ, Slate, The Washington Post, The Los Angeles Review of Books, and the Paris Review Daily. Born and raised in Southern Illinois, Epplin lives outside of New York City with his wife and daughter. Welcome to our show, Luke. How you doing, sir?
Welcome.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
So my question to you, Luke, is looking at the title and the subject matter, your book explores the relationship between Moses and Julius Erving during a critical time in basketball history. We're talking about the transition of ABA and NBA and so much drama and behind the scenes stuff that I still find remarkable. And I just finished the book the other day. My question to you is, what surprised you the most while you were researching the connection between Dr. J and Moses?
Well, it was the fact that from the very beginning, they were tied together. My book opens with Dr. J coming into Utah for the first time that Moses Malone he's going to face Moses Malone there for the first time since Moses Malone enters the league. The thing about Moses that I think a lot of people know about is that he's the very first player to go from high school directly to the pros. It was a huge leap. The ABA was the league that really revolutionized this idea that you didn't have to go 4 years to college, that you could have a hardship exemption and then go there before your 4 years of eligibility were up. But the idea that you wouldn't go to college at all, a wild idea. And the NBA never would have done something like that. But the ABA was so starved for talent that that's what they were doing. And so when Moses goes into the league, there was a lot of criticism, not only among sort of the white sports writers who are very condescending about it, but even among sort of African-American newspapers that are like, this sets a poor example for individuals that should be going to college and getting an education and whatnot. So they really needed somebody to validate this experiment, to say, you know what, I know that there's criticism out there, but I support this, and I think everyone else should too. And who do they look to? They looked at Dr. J. Dr. J at that time was the ambassador of the league. He really was somebody who took responsibility on himself to speak up for basketball and a league that was having a hard time surviving, having a hard time sort of scrounging up money and whatnot. Whatever needed to be done, Dr. J was willing to do, whether it was sign autographs for kids, whether it was give quotes for newspapers, or whether it was to give a speech in front of the Utah crowd before he was about to face Moses Malone. And that speech that Dr. J gave, which basically said, Moses, you're ready, I endorse this experiment, etc., really tied those two together. Moses would come up to Dr. J afterwards and sort of be like, how am I doing, Doc? You know, in that speech. And when I talked to Julius Erving and asked him, like, you know, you and Moses were just such different people. Like, how did you guys get along considering that Dr. J was so open and so accessible and so ready to do what it took? And Moses was kind of so introverted and so closed and did not really want to talk to the press. And Julius was like, well, I knew Moses when he was 18 years old. Like I gave that speech to him. And so I always had that connection. So I never felt like there was any sort of like tension between us because we were tied together from the start. And so, you know, that's really led me to think about the ways in which these two had careers that seemed almost as if they were on a collision course to come together.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's funny, I put that in my notes where Dr. J gave a speech. You put that in I think you put that in the prologue. And also in my notes, I wanted to point out, you give so much context based on the history and how the influence of these two players really resonates even to this day. For instance, you mentioned just the whole idea of Rucker Park. We all have heard of Rucker Park, but you went in and explained who Holcomb Rucker was, who was a Black Parks director in New York City. You emphasized that Dr. J put UMass on the map, which is the college he went to. And ironically, that's where basketball started, in Massachusetts. And one other note that really stood out to me was Steve Arnold was the sports agent that reached out to Dr. J after they got creamed by North Carolina in the NIT at Madison Square Garden. And he was the person that actually introduced the idea of Dr. J playing in the ABA. So those are, like, in the beginning of the book, they really grabbed my attention.
Yeah, Dr. J is a really interesting thing because Moses Malone was the man whenever he was in high school. Everybody wanted him. He was a national sensation. Like people were coming down and doing TV reports nationally about this high school kid. Everybody knew he was going to be something. Dr. J was not that. He was very lightly recruited. He went to UMass, which had never had anybody at that time go to the NBA. And then he goes to the ABA, which did not have a sort of television contract nationally. And so he really was more rumor than reality for a long time. And he was, I think, the last legend in sports because, you can sort of look at Michael Jordan and, yeah, he's a legendary player, but everything he did was televised. We can look at all these moves that he did. You can watch games that he played in the 1980s. You cannot watch games that Dr. J played in the 1970s. You had to hear about them. It was like an oral mythology that went around. And so the legend of Dr. J was what spread among folks. And it was almost like, do you believe it? Because people were like, he's doing moves that people wouldn't have even attempted or thought about. It was almost like he was an artist out there doing something wild. And it just kind of allowed your imagination to go wild. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's still so resonant, because, it's that legend that precedes him, this idea that here is somebody that is doing something totally new and innovative, and we can't see it. We only hear it.
There was a mystique to Dr. J that, we can see it, we can hear it and see it in the documentaries, but some of them, especially at Rucker Park, you gotta kind of got to be there to believe it. Earlier, you mentioned that, you've interviewed everybody for this book that was available. Did you have any challenges while researching these events and people from this period of time?
I mean, two main ones. The biggest one, of course, is that Moses is no longer with us.
Yeah.
He really didn't talk very much regardless. He never wrote his autobiography. He never really gave long-form interviews. He was very resistant to talking about his life. So I'm not sure how much I would have gotten out of him anyway, but I sure as heck would have liked to try. And the Sixers team that I'm really focusing on, which would have been the one in the early 80s, had some great guys on there. Bobby Jones, Andrew Toney, Maurice Cheeks, guys that were somewhat tough to get to. Andrew Toney has never given an interview to the press since he retired. Yeah. Never. He just won't talk. And, he's available. I've had, whenever I was talking to other members of the Sixers, they're like, he texts all the time. He comes to our private reunions. It's not like he's no longer associated with the team. He's just kind of took a vow of silence, and that included me. He wouldn't have anything to do with me. And Maurice Cheeks, too, is just a really, he's still that guy that doesn't want the spotlight on him. And so that's the way he played. He was constantly sort of deferring to Dr. J, to Julius, to Moses, to Bobby Jones, to whoever. And, he himself is a Hall of Fame player, and he was a tremendously great point guard, but he never wanted to sort of be in the limelight. And so I reached out to him so many different times and just been like, look, man, I'm not going to ask you anything personal. I just want to talk. And he's just like, I won't do it. Whenever you don't have some of the key members of the team talking to you, it can be challenging. But as I said, I did get so many others on that team, so I was able to write around it.
Yeah, I wish Moses was here because I would have loved to have you interview him and him elaborate on, there's a part in the book where you talk about how coveted he was when he was in Virginia. And in the book, you mentioned that there were bribes offered from cash in envelopes to abandoned new cars with the keys in front of the house.
Wow.
And he shared that the front page of the newspaper with headlines of the Watergate scandal was shared with the story of Moses Malone. That's how popular he was. That's how important he was in the basketball landscape. At the end of the day, by reading your book, it just became quite clear that Moses Malone was sought after because all these owners had dropped so much money and they knew that he could draw enough people to fill the stands for these games. And that's why so many people wanted him. That's why the coach from Maryland, was going so hard after him. I just want to mention, and Maurice can attest to this, Moses Malone coming to the Sixers, and we're Philly fans, was like Bryce Harper signing with the Phillies a few years ago. Yeah. It was like Terrell Owens signing with the Eagles 20 whatever years ago. That's how important Moses was becoming a player for the Sixers during that time.
there's a lot in there about sort of the Philadelphia mindset and the Philadelphia sports fandom and stuff like that. It sort of characterizes itself as almost like a blue collar city, and it has that sort of partiality toward athletes that are scrappy and that are kind of like brawlers and like really get their uniforms dirty, And Dr. J, for as amazing as he was, and I think that Sixers fans admire him and love him to no end, but he was somebody who was so cool that he never seemed to sweat. Like, if you look at a photo of Julius Erving, there's not a drop of sweat on there, man. It's like he's just the coolest dude on the planet. Yeah. And kind of cuts a little bit against the sort of Philly imagery. And so during the early 80s, before Moses comes on, the Philadelphia 76ers are having a hard time selling out their arena, which is crazy because they have the most exciting player in the world. And everywhere they travel, whether it's to, Cleveland or Detroit or whatever, they're selling out the arena, but they can't sell it out in Philly. Yeah. Then when Moses Malone comes over, he is that guy. He is the guy that they have to hire an extra guy to mop up Moses' sweat because he's sweating so much. And it looks like giving everything he has on every single play. And Philadelphians just are like, this is our guy. This is the man. And so it's almost like, it's amazing how much Malone sort of slots into the Philly athlete in a way that Julius Erving, for all his love, is somewhat, it's almost like it doesn't quite fit him.
What I recall as a kid was just the excitement of Moses coming to play with Dr. J. But I think the 70s is when maybe some of the favor for basketball faded in Philly. It could be for a number of reasons, socioeconomic, or there were racial tensions. You mentioned Frank Rizzo, you mentioned Wilson Good, who I remember clearly as a kid. Yeah. But as far as Dr. J, I think coming up short when they blew that lead against Portland and they couldn't get past the Lakers, they blew the 3-1 lead against Boston. Maybe the fans in Philly were so frustrated that they had lost hope. And I think maybe that could have affected the ticket sales.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, no, I mean, that whole idea of whenever Dr. J comes to the Sixers, he gets put onto a team with just gobs of talent. You got just Gerald Dawkins, George McGinnis, Doug Collins, Caldwell Jones, all of these amazing guys, Joe Jelly Bean Bryant. And there's this idea that this is just the best team and they're going to run the table. And it doesn't quite work because all of this talent is not complementary. It's almost like it's duplicative. And so they're unable to mesh all together as a team. And whenever they do lose to Portland, the Sixers make a tremendous error. And they start that advertising campaign that says, "We owe you one." Because there's this almost like arrogance that like, we have so much talent that we're going to win the championship. It's a given. And for them then to go, 6 years or something like that, and just struggle. I do think you're right that like the Sixers fans just are, they're impatient and then they grow cynical.
So your story, your book about Dr. J and Moses, why do you think that this particular story is relevant for readers today or just fans in general of the NBA?
I think the book is relevant for one main reason, in that it's trying to correct a sort of way that the narrative about basketball history has since become almost like canonized. There's this idea that the NBA was a league that was, riven with drug issues, violence issues, viewership issues, race issues, all of these sorts of things in the 70s and early 80s. And then Magic Johnson and Larry Bird come in. You got the Lakers, the Celtics, that sort of matchup, and those two together really kickstart the NBA and sort of put it into a global league that then continues through Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, et cetera, to the league that we have now. And that's just, that narrative, while it contains kernels of truth, is not fully true, because you can't tell the truth of that without Julius Erving and Moses Malone. Before the league becomes the Magic Bird show, which starts really in 1984 when they first face off each other, there's this little mini generation that happens after the merger of the ABA and the NBA and through the Sixers winning the championship, where the Sixers win the most games of any other team during that period. Julius Erving is the most influential player of that time, and just in the fact that he's inspiring so many people. And you start to see that with like Michael Jordan coming into the league, Clyde Drexler, all these people that seem sort of made in the image of Julius Erving. And, Moses Malone, as Maurice was saying, is also equally influential in just like, just the way that he is just hustling and grabbing the rebounds and sort of playing with that sort of like bulldozer attitude that then like, you see that almost in like the Bad Boy Pistons and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of influence that these two players have, and they've been relegated to footnotes in that history whenever really you need to put them on that same level as Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. And you also need to put the ABA on that level too, just in the way that like it's wide open, sort of free flowing, ripped from the playground style of play is now the more standard issue that we see in the NBA. And so it's really just trying to, bring us back to a time whenever Dr. J and Moses Malone haven't faded as much from the consciousness.
People tend to forget Moses Malone was a 3-time MVP. He was one of the best of that era. It's good that you have a book like this to remind people, because there's not that many 3-time NBA MVPs out there. So
right, it's only a handful. Only a handful. Yeah,
it's only a handful. So my next question is, let me ask you: can you share a moment in the book that you particularly found powerful or meaningful?
Yes. So I said that I struggled really hard to sort of figure out the narrative and how I was going to structure it and how I wanted the book to feel. And I remember whenever I was reading through, I think it was the Philadelphia Inquirer in 1982, after the Philadelphia 76ers lose to the Los Angeles Lakers. This is Dr. J's third time in the finals, his third time losing. And I think he thinks in his mind, that's it. It's over. Like, I'm already in my 30s. He has no idea that he's about to get Moses Malone. He realizes that he's not going to be able to get past Bird and Magic on his own. He needs help. It doesn't seem like he's going to get it. And the Sixers have to close the locker room because Dr. J starts crying. And as I said, Jay is the coolest guy. He is not one who showed emotion like that. And it was very brief to mention in the newspaper, maybe like a paragraph or two. But I was like, there it is. That moment right there. I want the book to build up to the Dr. J crying, because it seems like that is so important to him and so devastating that he's going to end his NBA career without a championship. And so his legacy is not going to be like most influential guy. It's going to be really amazing player, great artist, didn't quite have what it takes. And so he needs that championship. And for him not to get it, and for him then to subsequently cry around his teammates, I was like, that image right there is probably going to be the most important one.
I'm telling you, Maurice, when I read that part, I almost got emotional myself, because up to that point, you've only known Dr. J as this amazing spokesman, ambassador, like you said, Luke, professional, articulate, intelligent, and then he's in the locker room and they can't get over the hump and he breaks down. That resonated with me. So it's ironic you brought that up. So writing a book, I'm sure there's some details that maybe didn't make the cut. How did you decide, Luke, which details or events were most important to include in the book?
It's tough because I think a lot of other people who would write this book would include much more about the individual members of the 1983 76ers. But I really wanted this book to just really be about two people and their journey. And so it's so heavily focused on Dr. J. Moses Malone. Of course, I do go and give little mini histories of Andrew Toney and Bobby Jones, Billy Cunningham, all these people. But I really just decided that I wasn't going to give sort of full-on biographies of like Maurice Cheeks, Andrew Toney, and I wasn't going to go game by game by game by game. That I wanted it to read more like a novel. And for that to happen, it had to focus on character. And my two characters were the ones that were going to be in there. And so I had a lot more interesting detail on just, the sort of like, Andrew Toney's rocky entry into the league. I had a lot more interesting details. I did hours-long interview with Bobby Jones, and I could have gone deep into like his Christianity and the way that informed his game. I did a long interview with Billy Cunningham that I was able to sort of, pull from, but not fully. And so there was a lot of stuff about secondary people that I had to take out. I think someone else could write an entire other book just focused on the 1983 76ers.
You know what? I'm glad you didn't leave out, Luke and Maurice.
Yeah.
I'll mention this name. You maybe have never heard of him. It's a guy named Jack McMahon who worked for the Sixers as a scout.
I love that guy. Yeah.
He not only scouted Andrew Toney, but he also scouted Maurice Cheeks. He would drive to these, really small rural towns. I said it right that time. Rural towns. And if not for him, the Sixers may not have their all-star point guard and all-star shooting guard.
He was just like one of these guys that had been around. He played in the 50s, and back when the NBA was just in its infancy. And then he just he was a lifer, and he had this amazingly cynical. He cursed every other word. He ballooned up to 250 pounds. He was just one of these sort of crusty, almost like if he were in a movie, he'd be played by Gene Hackman. He was like that guy.
On our main episodes, my segment in particular is the teammate section, and you just rattled off a bunch of teammates. So really quick, I just want to ask you, who was the most fascinating teammate that you had to research for this book?
Andrew Toney is just the most mysterious man.
Mysterious.
The dude, he was just, it's not that he necessarily had a crazy background or anything, but he was somebody who, if you had put a gym in his backyard where he grew up, he never would have gone to sleep. He would have just shot. I called his college coach, I called his high school coach, and they were all just the janitors had to have a rule with him that whenever they started locking up, he had to leave because he would just be in the gym shooting. And I think that because of that, here's a detail I didn't put in the book. I talked to one of his teammates, a guy named Lionel Hollins, who played on the Trailblazers and then he played on the Sixers. And he told me that during the very first road trip that they took with Andrew Toney, his rookie season on the Sixers went out to a Mexican restaurant. And Andrew Toney asked for a side of cornbread. And the waiter was like, "This is a Mexican restaurant. We don't have cornbread." And Andrew Toney couldn't believe it. He was just like, "What? Where's the cornbread? I don't want it." And it was just because he'd been so single-minded in his pursuit of basketball that he was maybe a little the rest of the world was kind of not as new, he wasn't as worldly as he could have been, to know not to ask for cornbread in a Mexican restaurant. And I was like, oh, that's such an interesting detail, but I just couldn't fit it.
That's the next title of your next biography book for Andrew Toney. Where's the cornbread? Life of Andrew Toney. Yeah.
Well, Luke, if readers can take away just one message from Moses and the Doctor, what would it be?
Well, we've already talked about how I want these two back into the overarching narrative that we talk about. But to give another one, it's really interesting to me. Like I said, that 1976 team that Julius Erving comes on has George McGinnis on it. And Julius and George McGinnis are completely similar, and they don't go well together. And I was always thinking to myself, how did Julius Erving and Moses Malone fit so well? You would never see two more opposite people, not only on the court, where Julius was grace and Moses was grit, but off the court, where Julius was, articulate, eloquent, whatever, and Moses was closed off. And so I thought to myself, how in the world did they click together immediately and start running the table on the NBA? And it really is because they are so different from each other that they didn't step on each other's toes at all. Instead, they filled in each other's deficiencies. Like Julius Erving had a tough time with rebounding, and Moses Malone provided it. Moses Malone needed some sort of, creative artistry and sort of, somebody that could really score, which some of the Rockets players didn't really have, somebody that could create. And he provided that. And, he shot up enough shots that Moses was able to get the offensive rebound. They were really they filled in what the other lacked. And because they did something totally opposite both on and off the court, they didn't really step on each other's toes. And so they didn't have the sort of egos getting in the way that Julius and George McGinnis did. And so they were able to coexist almost perfectly. And so it really did teach me a lot about finding somebody that complements someone rather than just grabbing talent. It wasn't really until they got Moses that the Sixers became a team in every sense of the word.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out another comparable situation when it comes to the pairing of stars. Like if there was another book to be written, and let's say you didn't grow up in the 80s or 90s like we did, like a younger reader, and they're like, oh, Dr. J and Moses, they're cool, but, what would this be comparable to? And it'd be like if someone wrote a book, maybe Luke, this is your next book, wrote about the timeline that connects Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce. And if you think about the similarities, right? Garnett couldn't get it done in Minnesota. Neither could Paul Pierce. They complement each other like Moses and Doc did. And then the whole idea of winning a championship together after just one season. Remember, Moses got there and they won right away. When KG got to Boston, they got a chip in 2008. So I think that's a fair comparison of a timeline that's a little more, up to date.
I don't want to give away the top of my next book because this might be it, but it could also be Oscar Robertson coming onto the Bucks with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Kareem, of course, was super young, but Oscar, who, easily probably, maybe the best player in the league for a couple of years, or when he was in Cincinnati on those really, struggling teams. And then he comes on and they immediately just, shoot to the championship. So, that's
two great players.
I have my eye on right now.
All right, so we just finished asking Luke Epplin about his book, and now we're going to do something a little bit fun. We're going to do an exercise. We are about to enter the NBA What If Time Machine, so where we go back in time and revisit history of the NBA. So here's how it works, Luke. You will be presented with a set of what-if scenarios. You will offer your thoughts on the impact that each event had and how history would be different had they not happened. You all set?
Let's do it.
Let's start off with something personal so people can get to know you before we get to the NBA guys. Give us your what if when it comes to your personal experience in basketball. If you could relive any basketball moment in your life from childhood to adulthood, what would that be?
All right. So, as I said, I grew up a huge Bulls fan. And people might be too young to remember this, but when Michael Jordan retired the first time, 93 after the three-peat, it was like there was a death family, man. I went by weeks being like, this is tragic, this is unbelievable. So I got two what ifs on that. Number one, of course, is what if he hadn't retired? What if he'd stayed on and then he'd had to face the Rockets, which the Bulls always struggle against the Rockets, man.
They did.
And so if Hakeem beats the Bulls, does Jordan's armor, is it not as impenetrable as we now think of it? And then the second with that is I was shocked as a child whenever the Bulls then did extremely well that next season and, could have beaten the Knicks in 94. And so what if, I think it was Hugh Hollins, called that phantom foul on Scottie Pippen against...
he remembers the ref.
Hubert Davis, I can't remember. But it was a totally BS foul, man. And if he hadn't called that, the Bulls could have beaten the Knicks. And so what if the Bulls go to the finals without Jordan? And does that also make Jordan's armor a little bit, does it make it a little bit less strong?
Well, it definitely strengthens Scottie Pippen's legacy if that happened. Yeah. We know that for sure. Yeah. All right, speaking of legacies, this player just retired. We're talking about Chris Paul. I'm sure you remember this, Luke. What if Chris Paul would have played with Kobe had David Stern not vetoed the Lakers and Hornets trade?
Okay, so that was around 2011 or something, 10, 11, I don't remember. And so that would have been after the Lakers had won with Pau Gasol. And as I seem to recall, Pau Gasol was part of that trade.
Yes. And Odom was part of it.
Odom was part of it too. Wow. So Kobe was older. So he was in his probably early, mid-30s or something like that. And Chris Paul was young. I think that Chris Paul would have been exactly where he was, ringless. I think that the Lakers would have had to scramble to get a big man, And if they didn't have that, the two guard combo would have been good, but not good enough. Maybe if you had Kobe a little bit younger, it could have been, but I still think it wouldn't have quite worked.
All right. Let's get right back to Chicago with it. What if Derrick Rose did not suffer a major knee injury? I'm sorry.
All right, so
listen, we're Sixers fans, so we know about knee injuries.
Yeah.
So Derrick Rose doesn't have the knee injury. So he's extremely young when he has it. Was he like 25 or something?
It's actually against the Sixers, actually.
MVP like a year before that. I don't know. I mean, God, he was such an athletic player. If you get a chance, go onto YouTube and just check out his high school highlights. I mean, dude was doing stuff that, you wouldn't believe. I think that the Bulls are a good team, but because I've seen what the management has done, they don't make it without him. And he has a Garnett-like journey where he needs to be traded away from the Bulls, and he's a chip that is used by a team that needs one more piece, and they get him, and then he eventually wins the championship somewhere else. That's what I think.
Spoken like a true fan.
Yeah. All right. You mentioned Kobe earlier teaming up with Chris Paul, but let's go back further than that, Luke. What if the Hornets had not traded Kobe Bryant for Vlade Divac on draft night?
So Kobe would have been a Hornet then, and Vlade would have stayed on the Lakers.
Yep.
Okay, so Kobe would have been wearing those teal uniforms with the big bug on them. And let's remember, man, those things were cool AF. They were really awesome. I had a Hornet jacket. Like, there's a Larry Johnson, Alonzo Mourning.
The starter one, yeah.
Oh, the starter one, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that Kobe would have been perhaps even cooler than he is now, because that's just.
Ooh.
But like the Bulls, the Hornets are a cursed franchise, and Kobe would have had more of a journeyman's career. I think that he would have had to gone elsewhere to get a championship. He might have retired with 2 or 3 instead of 5, like he did, and maybe we think about him more. I don't know. Maybe his legacy would have been a little ding because of that.
He definitely would have gotten playing time, which he was distraught that he was not playing in LA the first 2 years. But yeah, he would have had the ball in his hands every play in Charlotte.
Oh, he would have. Yeah. I mean, the highlights that we would have gotten from him would have been amazing. Because remember he was behind Eddie Jones. Eddie Jones was great
player.
Yeah. He's a really good player. All right, so let's go back to the 80s with this one. What if Len Bias does not tragically pass away before playing a game for the Boston Celtics?
They draft Bias in 86. Oh, my gosh. So they're right off of that amazing season.
Yep.
So they win in 87. There's no question about that. I think that they almost win in 87 as is, and Bias would have taken them over the top. Larry Bird gets injured in 89, I think, and then he's kind of never the same player. So then Bias takes over the team. And I think it would have depended on, they keep Bird, Parrish, and McHale into the early 90s. I think they would have had to jettison some of those guys a little sooner and get younger and start a dynasty. So I don't know, but I would say they at least win one more. And Larry Bird has 4 championships to Magic Johnson's 4. And then it's just a little more even. And that would have been fair because Magic, yeah. I mean, he had Worthy, Kareem, all those people, yeah.
You think?
it would have been great if they could retire each with 4. That would have been the best.
You think Len Bias would have cut into the championships of Jordan?
Oh, now you're getting on. I don't know, man. I mean, that 91 Bulls team was so dominant. I mean, Jordan and Pippen were so athletic. I don't know. I mean, Bias probably would have been up there. Would Bias have beaten the Pistons in the early 90s? Or the Pistons just beat the heck out of them? I don't know. But yeah. I think it depends on how the Celtics built around him. If they would have kept Parrish and McHale, then no. He'd have been the young guy with a bunch of aging people around him. He would have needed more youth.
They would have had Reggie Lewis, Dino Raja.
Lord, man.
Brian Shaw.
Yeah.
All right, I don't want to even think about that.
All right, let's go back a few decades, and in season 2 of NBA Now and Then, we compare players, obviously. And we decided to begin comparing inter-era. So we compared Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to Bill Russell. And in that process of research, I learned that the Nets had a chance to, the ABA Nets, had a chance to sign Lou Alcindor out of UCLA. And he had a meeting with George Mikan, where George Mikan kind of was, I don't know, trying to flex on Lou Alcindor and play hard negotiator, where Lou Alcindor decided, okay, I'm going to go sign with the Bucks if you're not going to offer me the highest amount or what have you. So my question to you is, what if George Mikan offers Lou Alcindor the $1 million check and signs with the Nets?
That would have started a whole domino effect because, yeah, I mean, Kareem is so dominant. And this would have been before Artis Gilmore was in the ABA. Kareem would have just absolutely destroyed the ABA. And the Nets would have been so dominant. I think that whenever they drafted him, I can't remember if they still had Rick Barry on the Nets. But, I mean, teaming those two up, they would have just been so wildly successful. And Kareem, you know, he's from New York City. He always said that his dream was to play for the Knicks. But if he couldn't play for the Knicks, he wanted to play for the Nets. And so I think he would have spent his entire career in New York and still be the sort of New York icon that he could have been. The other thing that would have happened, of course, is that I very much doubt that the Nets would have gotten Julius Erving because the Nets at that time, you know, like all ABA clubs, were really scraping for money. And so I don't think they would have been able to have both of them on the team, and nor would they necessarily have needed them. So Julius Erving might have jumped to the NBA earlier. And so it could have just started this whole domino effect of things that got shifted. Then, of course, Kareem probably never goes to the Lakers, and Magic Johnson, you know, doesn't, you know, make it to the finals in 1980, and the Sixers win. So, yeah, I mean, that's a what if that not only would affect, you know, I mean, the Derrick Rose thing, it's like, yeah, maybe the Bulls would have won more playoffs. This what if right here, the NBA would just look totally different. And the way that we think about it would just be so wildly different. Kareem was that good of a player, and his decision of which league to go to just could have altered the fate of the entire sort of basketball universe.
Yeah, that's a good point. My next what if, and I need to add some context to it if you didn't know, or listeners didn't know. The question was, what if Tim Duncan signed with the Orlando Magic in 2000? Now, Tim Duncan was a free agent at the time, and it really came down to two teams. His team he played for, the San Antonio Spurs, or the Orlando Magic. And because the coach at the time, Doc Rivers, decided that, made it a point that you can't have family or friends on the team playing, that influenced Tim Duncan to re-sign with the San Antonio Spurs. So let me ask the question again. What if Tim Duncan signed with the Orlando Magic in 2000?
The 2000s would have been a sadder time because, I mean, he signs with the Magic with this idea of forming this, like, super team with Grant Hill. They eventually, of course, get Tracy McGrady, and those guys are completely injury-prone. You know, at the time, we have to remember that Grant Hill was supposed to be the next Jordan. He signs with the Magic and immediately becomes injured. And so Tim Duncan's career becomes a lot more snake-bitten if he does that. And he would have deprived us all of those amazing Spurs teams from the aughts, which I just absolutely love, with Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, Dwight Leonard at the end. I think those Spurs teams, I think people forget because we're all talking about Kobe. Tim Duncan may be better than Kobe Bryant. Like, I mean, just sign me up as a Tim Duncan stan. Like, I love that guy. I think that he's like Moses. He didn't talk very much. He wasn't as charismatic. And so he gets a little bit overlooked in these debates. But gosh dang, man, I loved him and I love those Spurs things. And I got to say, my wife is from San Antonio. And so I've since sort of adopted the Spurs, and I can't wait for my daughter to get older so that we can start going to the Spurs games again and, going to see Wembley.
Talk about the luckiest franchise in NBA history. Oh, my goodness. David Robinson, Tim Duncan, Wembanyama. By the way, Doc Rivers disputes that, or he denies that that whole thing went down. Just putting it out there. We can't prove that. My question is now related more to your book, Luke, which has to do with the former Rockets owner, a man named George Maloof. And you can provide context when I'm done. What if George Maloof, the former Rockets owner, lives, because he passed away, what if he lives to re-sign Moses Malone to Houston?
Okay, so George Maloof was the owner of the Rockets in the late 70s, early 80s. He loved Moses Malone. Moses Malone was the franchise at that time. He was the guy that really put the Houston Rockets on the map and made them relevant. And Moses Malone is going to be a free agent at the end of the 1982 season. And in early 81, George Maloof tries to negotiate with Moses Malone's agent and make him a Rocket for life, basically, give him this really long-term contract. Before they can hammer out the details, George Maloof drops dead. The team kind of goes into disarray. His kids take it over, and they simply don't have the wherewithal to offer Malone that much money to stay. And Moses Malone becomes extremely insulted because he thought he was going to be a Rocket for life, and now he's not even getting a contract extension. So if George Maloof had stayed alive, Moses Malone likely would have stayed with the Rockets. And that would have caused a lot of things. One, Dr. J never gets his ring. So that sort of idea of him crying is the lasting image of his career. Two, the Rockets franchise doesn't win the championships they do, because getting rid of Malone allows them to draft Ralph Sampson, and then they tank the next year too, which allows them to draft Hakeem Olajuwon. If they keep Malone, they're likely to remain a team that wins about 50 games or something like that, maybe high 40s, whatever, make the playoffs, maybe not make it to the final, or at least with the team they have. And they never get those high draft picks that allow them to do that. And so Hakeem goes elsewhere. And again, the whole sort of league is scrambled. But I think that the ultimate effect for the two people in my book is neither Moses nor Julius ever get a championship.
Maybe Hakeem goes to Portland.
Who knows, man? I mean, the whole thing is scrambled. Imagine if Hakeem goes to Portland then, and like the Trailblazers then probably beat the Bulls in '92 or 91. So then, that affects Jordan.
So my final what if is a good one. What if Harold Katz does not buy the Sixers in the early '80s?
All right, so for those who don't know Harold Katz, the Sixers were owned by this guy named Fitz Dixon from 76 to 82. Fitz Dixon is an extremely wealthy guy who just does not care at all about basketball, not a basketball fan whatsoever. He sells the team after the Sixers lose to the Celtics in 1981. Harold Katz buys it, and this dude, he founded Nutrisystem. He is just a fanatic of basketball, and he's a fanatic of Philadelphia basketball. He's a Philly guy through and through, and he makes it his mission to get that championship. And so he really is, I mean, I think it's safe to say, no Harold Katz, no championship, because I don't think that anybody else who bought that team, it probably would have been another wealthy person, maybe not even from Philadelphia. They wouldn't have that same just like, I'm going to go all out to win the championship, and they don't sign Moses Malone. Because they signed Moses to, $3 million a year or whatever. And at the time, that was ridiculous money.
Yep.
And nobody else would have done that. And Malone likely would have had to stay with the Rockets at a much lesser price. And so without Katz, again, Julius and Moses retire without a championship. I think we forget that because after that, Katz became a villain. He traded Moses Malone. He trades away draft picks. The Sixers could have gotten Brad Daugherty. He drafts Sean Bradley. He does all of these really dumb things. And just
a lot of bad trades.
The Sixers base. But if Harold Katz had sold the team in, let's say, 1984, he would have been, people would still talk about Harold Katz in Philadelphia as though he was safe.
Yeah, talk about reliving a painful past when they got rid of the first pick. Brad Daugherty, I think Charles Barkley has a great story of when he learned that they traded the pick. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. I think he actually went out partying the night before because they had the number one pick, and he woke up and they traded him. So, all right. Well, we are pretty much done with our interview with Luke Epplin. Remember, his book, Moses and the Doctor, is online, Amazon, and obviously your publisher has, I'm sure, a page for it. But before we let you go, Luke, please remind all of our listeners where they can find your books.
Wherever books are sold, if you want an autographed copy, my local bookstore is called the Astoria Bookshop. That's astoriabookshop.org. Every book you buy there will come to you signed. Or you can go to my website, which is just lukeepplin.com, send me an email, and I can send you a signed book later.
Yeah, it's been great having you on, and hopefully we'll have you on again in the future with your next book.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
And so the next time you will hear from us, we will be interviewing the supervising animator for the movie Space Jam to discuss the making of the 1996 classic hit with MJ and Bugs Bunny in celebration of its 30th year anniversary. And then not too distant from that interview, we will be chatting with Keenan Holly, the director of the Amazon Prime docuseries Soul Power. So please don't forget to follow us on social media, on all podcast platforms. On behalf of Luke Epplin and Maurice Huggins, I'm Uriah Young with the 50, 40, 90 interview series. Thanks for spending time with us. Take care.